The photo arrived on a Tuesday, a mundane Tuesday, the kind where the scent of simmering dinner filled the kitchen and the hum of the washing machine was the loudest sound. My sister, Clara, had sent it. A quick, accidental flash of her life, meant for someone else, but delivered straight to my phone. I opened it without a second thought, and in that instant, the world tilted on its axis. My husband, Robert, was in the picture, beaming, holding two tiny infants. The caption, a simple, devastating line, "Our little miracles." My name is Sarah. I'm 36, an archivist by profession, meticulously cataloging histories, finding patterns in disparate documents, connecting the dots that others miss. I valued truth, order, and the quiet certainty of facts. I just never imagined I'd have to apply those skills to my own marriage. For 10 years, I had built my life around Robert, around the shared dream of a family that felt perpetually out of reach. Robert and I met in college. He was charismatic, a natural leader, with a laugh that could fill any room. He was building a tech startup, and I loved watching his ambition take shape. We talked about children constantly, names, schools, whether we'd stay in the city or buy a house with a garden. It felt like a promise, a future we were both actively creating. But that future never arrived easily. We tried for years. The fertility clinic became a second home, filled with hushed voices and the sterile scent of antiseptic. There were the endless tests, the invasive procedures, the hormone injections that left my body a roadmap of bruises, and my spirit a landscape of quiet grief. We lost 3 pregnancies, each a silent heartbreak I carried mostly alone. Robert always seemed to bounce back faster, his optimism a shield I sometimes resented. I would lie awake, replaying every moment, searching for the flaw, the mistake, the reason my body seemed to betray us. I blamed myself, my demanding job, even the occasional glass of wine. I blamed everything but the truth, because the truth was a luxury I didn't yet possess. Through it all, Robert was my rock. In waiting rooms, he'd hold my hand, his voice a steady murmur. "We'll get through this, Sarah. Together." I believed him. I believed him with the unwavering faith you place in the sunrise, because the alternative was simply too painful to contemplate. My sister, Clara, was always there too. 3 years my junior, she was the picture of empathy, always ready with a hug, a home-cooked meal, or a listening ear. She'd tell me how strong I was, how she didn't know how I endured it all. I never once considered that admiration and a more complex, darker emotion could wear the exact same mask. The day the photo came, I had just finished a tedious virtual meeting. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across our living room. My phone buzzed twice, and then I saw it. Robert, beaming, holding 2 infants, the same man who, just a month prior, had held me close, whispering, "One more round, Sarah. We can't give up." Clara called almost immediately. I answered but didn't speak. "Sarah," she choked out, her voice thin and reedy. "I didn't want you to find out this way." I hung up. I didn't ask a single question. 10 years of archival work had taught me one fundamental principle. When you find the first glaring inconsistency, you don't immediately confront the source. You gather your evidence. You map the full extent of the deception before you ever reveal your hand. So I opened my laptop. I found the most respected family law attorney in the city, a woman named Eleanor Vance, and booked the earliest available appointment. 2 days later, I sat in her elegant office, the air thick with the scent of leather and possibility, and signed the initial papers to begin divorce proceedings. My hand was steady. I remember a strange sense of calm. I didn't tell Robert. I didn't tell Clara. I went home that night and cooked dinner, pretending nothing had changed, because for the first time in years, I understood something with absolute clarity. I wasn't the one who needed to explain. While my husband celebrated new life with the woman who had once been my confidant, believing I was still oblivious, I was already 3 steps ahead. And what I did next, quietly, methodically, was something neither of them would ever see coming. The morning after I signed the papers, I woke before dawn. I made coffee for one, a small, defiant act. Robert had texted the night before, a casual message about a business trip that would keep him out of town for a few days. I read it twice, then I went to work. My career had taught me that those who believe they're above reproach often leave the most obvious trails. They grow careless, convinced of their own cleverness. Robert had spent a decade cultivating the image of a devoted husband, a man suffering alongside me through the agony of infertility. That narrative required constant upkeep, and people busy maintaining one elaborate lie rarely notice the crumbs of another. I started with the credit card statements. We'd always kept separate accounts, a practical decision that now felt like a stroke of prescience, but there was a joint account for household expenses. Buried beneath months of grocery receipts and utility bills, I found 4 recurring charges to the same boutique hotel in a quiet suburb, a place neither of us had any reason to visit. Each stay was for 2 nights, always a Thursday into a Friday. I cross-referenced these dates with my own digital calendar, which, unbeknownst to Robert, logged my location history. 3 of those hotel dates aligned perfectly with weeks I was recovering from particularly draining IVF procedures. Weeks Robert had told me he was working late, clearing his head at the office. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, until the first hint of dawn. Piece by piece, the last 3 years of my marriage rearranged themselves into a grotesque mosaic. Clara had often helped out, driving Robert to appointments when I was too unwell. "Just helping a brother-in-law," she'd say, her voice light. I found medical records showing those appointments often coincided with days Robert had no scheduled visits at all. Then I found the shared cloud storage account. Robert had forgotten I still had access to a folder we'd set up years ago for vacation photos, never deactivated. And there they were, hundreds of pictures of Clara, Robert, and the twins, chronicling their lives together. Birth announcements, first smiles, family outings, a complete, parallel life, unfolding in plain sight, while I grieved a future I thought we were still fighting for. The emotional impact was less a shock and more a slow, chilling realization. It wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated, sustained deception. The grief I'd felt, the self-blame, the desperate hope, it had all been a performance for Robert. And Clara, my sister, had been complicit, starring in the lead role. I didn't confront them, not yet. I simply continued to gather. I compiled every piece of evidence, every date, every financial transaction. I built a case so airtight it could withstand any challenge. I worked with Eleanor Vance, my attorney, who was impressed by my meticulousness, by the sheer volume of undeniable facts. She told me I had more than enough to proceed, not just with a divorce, but with a significant claim for emotional distress and financial misconduct. The day Robert returned from his business trip, I was waiting. He walked in, whistling, carrying a small suitcase. He looked tired, but happy, a glow I now understood. "Hey, honey," he said, dropping a kiss on my forehead. "Missed you." "Did you?" I asked, my voice flat. He paused, sensing the shift. His smile faltered. "What's wrong?" "Everything," I said, and placed a thick folder on the kitchen table. "Everything is wrong." He opened it, his eyes scanning the documents. The hotel receipts, the medical records, the photos. His face drained of color. He looked from the papers to me, then back to the papers, as if trying to find a loophole, a logical explanation. "Sarah, I can explain," he stammered. "Can you?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "Can you explain why you told me you were working late while you were with my sister? Can you explain why you let me believe my body was failing us while you were building a family with someone else? Can you explain the lies, Robert? All 10 years of them?" He sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping. "It wasn't like that at first," he mumbled. "Clara, she was just there. She understood. After the last miscarriage, you just shut down. I felt so alone." "Alone?" I scoffed. "You think you were alone. I was the one injecting myself with hormones, enduring endless procedures, burying 3 babies. I was the one waking up every morning with a hollow ache, while you were building a secret life with my sister. You weren't alone, Robert. You were a coward." He tried to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, but the words felt hollow, meaningless. I had already moved past anger, into a cold, hard resolve. I told him I had filed for divorce. I told him I wanted everything he had taken from me, not just financially but the years of my life, the emotional toll. He looked at me, bewildered, as if he truly hadn't grasped the magnitude of his actions. Then, a new twist emerged. Robert's mother, Margaret, called me a few days later, her voice trembling. "Sarah, I need to talk to you. It's about Robert and Clara, and the twins." I met her at a quiet cafe. She looked utterly devastated. I've known for years, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper, since the first time Clara told me she was pregnant. But she made me promise not to tell Robert. She said he'd leave her, that he'd never forgive her for keeping it from you. My blood ran cold. Keeping what from me, Margaret? She took a deep breath. The twins, they're not Robert's. Clara had an affair with someone else, a colleague from work. She got pregnant, and she panicked. She knew how much Robert wanted children. She manipulated him, made him believe they were his. The world spun. Not Robert's? All this time, the betrayal, the pain, the secret family, and the children weren't even his? It was a layer of deception so profound, so twisted, it almost defied belief. Margaret explained that Clara had been desperate, terrified of losing Robert, and had seen an opportunity in our shared infertility. She had convinced Robert, and then Margaret, to keep the secret. Margaret, in her misguided attempt to protect her son from further heartbreak, had gone along with it. I felt a strange mix of emotions, the initial shock, then a wave of profound sadness for Robert, who had been a victim of Clara's deceit just as much as I had. The anger, however, remained firmly directed at Clara. She had not only betrayed me, but she had built an entire life on a lie, involving innocent children in her web of deceit. I left the cafe, the new information heavy in my mind. I called Eleanor Vance. "We have new evidence," I told her, and explained everything Margaret had revealed. Eleanor was shocked, but quickly saw the strategic advantage. This changed everything. Robert was not just a cheating husband. He was a man who had been duped into believing he was a father to children who weren't his. The divorce proceedings began. Robert was initially furious when he learned the truth about the twins. He confronted Clara, a scene I only heard about secondhand, filled with shouting and accusations. Clara, cornered, eventually admitted everything. She had been desperate, she claimed, had loved Robert so much she couldn't bear to lose him. Her apologies rang hollow. In court, Robert looked like a ghost of his former self. His ambition, his charisma, had all been stripped away. He had lost his wife, his sister, and the 2 children he believed were his. I, on the other hand, felt a strange sense of liberation. The truth, however painful, had set me free. I asked for a fair settlement, nothing more than what I was legally entitled to. The emotional damage Clara had inflicted on all of us was far greater than any financial compensation. Clara, I heard, moved out of state with the twins, unable to face the fallout. Robert sold his share of his company and moved to another city, trying to rebuild a life far from the wreckage of the one he had so carelessly and unknowingly destroyed. Margaret and I, surprisingly, maintained a connection. She continued to express her deep regret, her sorrow for her part in the deception. We met occasionally for coffee, 2 women bonded by a shared, painful history. I didn't forgive her immediately, but I saw her genuine remorse, her efforts to make amends. That mattered. I didn't rebuild my life around what I had lost, but around what I had learned. A year after the divorce was finalized, I used part of my settlement to establish a small foundation. It helps couples navigate infertility with transparency, providing access to information and support, ensuring no one carries blame that isn't theirs to bear. It's called The Unseen Truth. It doesn't need my name attached to it to matter. It just needs to exist. I often think about those 10 years, not with bitterness, but with a strange kind of gratitude for the woman they forged me into. I spent so long believing I had failed at the one thing I wanted most. I know now that I never failed at anything. I simply trusted people who weren't honest enough to deserve it. For 10 years I blamed myself. I won't waste another day doing that. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't making someone suffer, it's refusing to carry their lies any longer. This story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.